My name is Grace Miller, 25 years old, and I'll never forget the sound of my mother's voice the night she turned me into a stranger. It was late December in Estes Park, Colorado, snow swirling like dust under the porch light. I stood there, suitcase in hand, my breath visible in the freezing air. Mom's face was pale, her jaw tight. "You made your choice, Grace. Now live with it." Behind her, my dad said nothing, just stood with his arms crossed, a shadow behind the glass door. My brother, Daniel, watched from the stairs, expressionless. I waited for someone to stop her, to say, "She's still our daughter." But no one did. When the door slammed, the wind swallowed the sound. I remember my fingers going numb as I gripped the handle of my old suitcase. My boots crunched against the ice-crusted steps. The porch light flickered once, then went dark, leaving me in silence. That was the moment I realized I wasn't coming back. It wasn't about a crime or betrayal or anything unforgivable. It was about love, the kind they didn't approve of. His name was Ethan Cole, a carpenter with a quiet laugh and sawdust in his hair. He didn't wear a tie or drive a Lexus, but he listened. He made me feel seen in a family that had never really looked at me. But in my parents' eyes, that was enough to make him unworthy, and me foolish. I remember the night everything broke. Dinner at home, candles, my mom's perfect table setting. And then I told them I was moving in with Ethan. The silence stretched like a rope about to snap. Dad set down his fork. Mom's lips pressed together until they disappeared. "Are you really throwing away your future for a man who works with his hands?" she asked. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm building something." She laughed, sharp and small. "You sound just like him." When I walked out that door, I thought I'd finally chosen freedom. I didn't realize freedom can feel colder than any snowstorm. The wind that night sliced through my coat. I kept walking. The highway lights in the distance like little promises of warmth. I told myself I was strong, that love would make it worth it. And maybe you've been there too, standing alone when the people you thought would love you unconditionally suddenly don't. If you've ever been cut off by your own family for loving the wrong person, drop a comment below. Tell me your story. Maybe it'll help someone else feel less alone. And hey, hit subscribe, because this story doesn't end in the snow. It starts there. By the time I reached Ethan's truck, parked by the edge of town, my tears had frozen on my cheeks. He opened the door, his eyes widening when he saw the suitcase. He asked, "They kicked you out?" I nodded. "They said I made my choice." He pulled me close, his jacket smelling faintly of pine and sawdust, and he whispered, "We'll make it work." I believed him. I needed to. The night my parents chose pride over love, I lost the life I'd known, but I thought I'd found a new one waiting for me. I couldn't have been more wrong, because that night wasn't the end of my pain. It was only the beginning of a storm that would tear through everything I believed about love, family, and trust. When I moved in with Ethan, I thought the silence of my parents' house would fade from memory. But silence has a way of following you. It settles in your chest and echoes every time you start to believe you're safe. Our little place sat on the edge of Estes Park, a one-bedroom cabin that smelled like cedar and coffee. The mornings were cold, the floors creaked, and the heater groaned like an old man. But to me, it felt like freedom. Ethan would wake before dawn, slip out to the workshop, and come back with his hands rough and warm, wood dust clinging to his hair. When he smiled at me, I could almost forget the sound of my mother's voice telling me I wasn't enough. Almost. I'd grown up in a house built on comparison. My brother Daniel was the blueprint for success, a financial analyst, married to a lawyer, living in Denver in a home big enough to echo. Mom bragged about him to everyone, the church ladies, the neighbors, even the cashier at the grocery store. "And Grace," she'd add after a pause, her smile tightening, "she teaches art classes for children. It's sweet." Sweet. The word felt like a polite dismissal, a pat on the head. I used to paint for hours in my room, brush to canvas, music low, trying to find beauty in the small things, light on glass, rain on a window pane. But every painting I showed my parents was met with the same response. "That's nice, honey," Mom would say, without looking up. Dad would nod, distracted, like I was a faint radio in the background of his life. So I learned to stop showing them. That's why when Ethan looked at my sketches like they mattered, it filled a space I didn't know was empty. He'd say things like, "You see the world differently, Grace. That's a gift." No one in my family had ever called the way I saw the world a gift. But love built on broken foundations still cracks. Even in our quiet cabin, I carried the ache of wanting to be approved, of wishing my parents would call. Some nights, I'd scroll through Daniel's Facebook photos, family dinners, vacations, holiday cards, and wonder if Mom ever thought of me. I'd tell myself it didn't matter. Yet when the snow began to fall, when the house felt too still, I'd find myself whispering, "Why wasn't I ever enough?" Ethan would catch me staring into space. "You're somewhere else again," he'd say gently. I'd shrug, just tired. He never pressed, and part of me was grateful. The other part wanted him to ask, to dig deep, to see how badly I still hurt. On Sundays, when he worked overtime, I'd drive into town for groceries. Sometimes I'd see my mother's friends at the market. They'd glance at me, then at the ringless hand pushing the cart, and smile that sympathetic smile that really meant, "Poor thing." Once, Mrs. Crawford from next door stopped me in the aisle. "Grace, honey, your mom says you're still with that carpenter boy. You doing okay out there?" Her tone was soft, but soaked in judgment. I forced a smile. "I'm fine, Mrs. Crawford." She patted my arm. "You know your mama just wants what's best." I drove home crying, because best had never included me. That night, Ethan found me sketching by candlelight. Power had gone out again. He looked at my drawing of a cracked teacup, light spilling through it. He said, "That's beautiful." I told him, "It's me." He didn't understand, but he kissed my forehead anyway. Winter deepened. I sent my parents a Christmas card, nothing dramatic, just wishing you peace. It came back 2 weeks later, returned to sender. No note, no message, just their handwriting confirming what I already knew. So I stopped trying. But grief doesn't vanish, it just hides under the skin, waiting. Every time Ethan held me, every laugh we shared, a quiet voice whispered that love could disappear again without warning. And though I didn't know it yet, that fear would soon become prophecy. Because sometimes the people who rescue you from pain end up teaching you a deeper kind of heartbreak, one that doesn't come from rejection, but from betrayal wearing a familiar smile. It started with small things, tiny shifts in Ethan's voice, the way he'd look past me when I talked. He began working later, coming home long after the streetlights went out, smelling faintly of cologne he didn't own. I told myself he was just tired, that he was taking extra jobs to help us get by. But deep down, something in me knew. One night, while folding laundry, I found a crumpled receipt in his jeans, 2 lattes and a slice of cheesecake, at a cafe we'd never been to. The date was a night he told me he was fixing a client's deck. I stared at it for a long time, the numbers blurring, the truth whispering, "You're being lied to again." Anger didn't come all at once. It arrived in small doses, like static in the air, until it filled every breath I took. I tried to ignore it, to believe that love couldn't betray me twice, but lies have a sound. They hum between words, hide in silences too long, and Ethan had started humming a lot. 2 days later, I came home early from the store. His truck was in the driveway, music drifting faintly from inside. My heart lifted for a moment until I heard laughter, a woman's laughter. I froze by the door, hand on the knob, my pulse pounding in my ears. Then I heard Ethan's voice, soft and low, saying her name, Jessica. That's when something inside me snapped. I walked in. The room went silent. She was sitting on our couch, one of my sketches on her lap. My sketch! Ethan stood there, guilt written across his face like an open wound. Grace, he started. I didn't let him finish. You brought her here? My voice trembled, not with fear, but with fury. In our home? It's not what it looks like, he said quickly, stepping forward. Then tell me what it is, because I gave up everything for you. My family, my friends, my life. Do you have any idea what that cost me? Jessica grabbed her purse, stammering, I didn't know. She rushed out, the door slamming behind her. Ethan stood there, hands open, helpless. Grace, I messed up. I was lonely, okay? You've been distant, always thinking about your parents, your past. I laughed bitterly. So your solution was to cheat? To find someone who didn't remind you of the woman you broke? He tried to reach for me, but I stepped back. Don't touch me. The storm outside was building. Rain against the windows, wind howling like something angry. I wanted to scream, to destroy something, but instead, I went still. I packed my things quietly, my brushes, my sketchbooks, the photo of us from the fair. Ethan pleaded, his voice cracking. Grace, please, I can fix this. No, I said, my throat burning. You can't fix what you never valued. When I walked out the door, lightning flashed behind me, lighting up his face in fragments. For a moment, I saw regret, but it was too late. I drove aimlessly through the night, headlights cutting through sheets of rain, the world outside blurred. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't go back, to him or to the people who turned their backs on me first. I pulled into an empty gas station and sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my hands hurt. The truth hit me like a punch. I had no one. The man I loved had betrayed me, and the family I lost was never going to take me back. Somewhere between tears and exhaustion, anger found its shape. It wasn't loud anymore. It was cold, sharp, steady. They had all chosen their pride, their comfort, their image over love, and now I would choose something too. Myself. That realization didn't bring comfort. It brought clarity, and the terrifying knowledge that I had to start over with nothing. When dawn came, the storm had passed, leaving a gray, washed-out sky. I stepped out of the car, rain-soaked and trembling, and whispered to no one in particular, "You can break my heart, but you won't break me." I didn't know how true that would become, because sometimes the anger that almost destroys you is the same fire that rebuilds you. I don't remember how long I drove that night. The highway stretched out endlessly, the rain falling in sheets so heavy it blurred the world into gray streaks. The wipers could barely keep up. My phone buzzed twice, Ethan's name flashing on the screen, and then went dark when the battery died. I didn't bother plugging it in. When I finally pulled over, I realized I'd been driving in circles around Loveland, 40 miles from home. My gas tank hovered near empty. The silence after the engine stopped was deafening, the kind of silence that presses against your ribs and whispers, "You're alone now." I sat there for a long time, hands on the wheel, trying to slow my breathing. The smell of wet asphalt filled the air. My suitcase was in the back seat, same one I'd carried out of my parents' house 5 years ago. I thought about that night, about my mother's voice, about how full of hope I'd been, even as she closed the door on me. And now, here I was again, cast out, this time by the person I'd trusted to never hurt me. The rain slowed to a drizzle, and I drove until I saw a flickering sign, Bluebird Motel, vacancy. The neon letters buzzed faintly, like they were struggling to stay alive too. I parked, grabbed my bag, and stepped inside. The clerk barely looked up. $47 for the night. I handed over the cash with shaking fingers. The room smelled of damp carpet and old smoke. There was a single bed, a lamp with a crooked shade, and a Bible in the drawer that I didn't open. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor. The silence was too big, too heavy. That's when the tears came. Not the kind you can hide, but the kind that break out of you like a storm you've been holding back for years.
I pressed my face into the pillow and cried until my throat hurt, until there was nothing left. Somewhere between sobs, I whispered to the dark, "Why does love keep leaving me?" No answer came. Just the hum of the old air conditioner and the steady drip of rain against the window. By morning, the world outside was white. Snow had fallen overnight, covering everything in a quiet that felt both peaceful and cruel. My car was half buried in frost. I made instant coffee with the machine in the lobby, the taste bitter and metallic, but it was warm. I told myself I'd figure it out. I always did. I had $70 left, no job, and nowhere to go. My parents had made it clear I wasn't welcome, and calling them again would only reopen wounds that hadn't healed. Still, part of me wanted to hear their voices, to believe that maybe they'd changed. I found a charger behind the motel desk, plugged in my phone, and waited. When the screen lit up, I hesitated for a long moment before dialing Mom. She answered on the second ring. "What do you want, Grace?" Her voice was as sharp as I remembered. "Mom, I just needed to hear you. Things with Ethan didn't work out." A pause, then a sigh. "Grace, we told you what would happen. Actions have consequences." "Can I just stay for a few days?" I asked quietly. "Until I figure things out?" "No." Her tone was final. "You made your bed. Now lie in it." The line went dead. I called Dad next, hoping he'd be softer. He wasn't. "Grace, your mother's right. You're an adult now. Handle it." That was it. No warmth, no comfort, just dismissal. Again. I sank to the motel floor, phone slipping from my hand. For the first time, I felt something worse than heartbreak. Emptiness. The kind that hollows you out until you're not sure what's left. Outside, the snow kept falling, thick and silent. I watched it through the window, the flakes landing on the glass and melting away instantly. Tiny, brief, gone. That was love, I thought. Beautiful, fragile, temporary. When night came, I lay awake listening to the hum of cars on the distant highway. The ache in my chest was unbearable, but I couldn't cry anymore. I just stared at the ceiling, whispering to myself, "Don't disappear, Grace. Not yet." Because somewhere deep down, beneath all that hurt, a small voice refused to die. A voice that whispered, "This isn't how your story ends." The next morning, I packed my things and checked out of the motel. The clerk didn't look up when he handed me the receipt. It didn't matter. I wasn't sure where I was going, only that I couldn't stay. The snow had stopped, leaving the air still and painfully clear. My car groaned as I started it, the heater coughing warm air that smelled faintly of dust and despair. I drove aimlessly through downtown Loveland until I saw a small bookstore tucked between a laundromat and a bakery. The sign above the door read, "Bennett's Books and Brews." The windows were fogged, but inside I could see a woman stacking paperbacks with quiet precision. Something about that warmth, the soft glow, the smell of coffee drifting out, pulled me in. A bell chimed as I stepped inside. The woman looked up. She was in her late 50s, with kind eyes and streaks of silver in her dark hair. "Cold day to be out wandering," she said with a gentle smile. "Looking for anything particular?" I hesitated. "Just somewhere to sit." She nodded toward a corner table. "Buy a cup of coffee, and you can sit as long as you need." I ordered a small drip coffee and sank into the chair by the window. My hands wrapped around the cup, drawing in its warmth. The world outside moved in slow motion. People passing by, scarves pulled tight, laughter fading into the wind. When the woman came over to wipe the next table, she glanced at my suitcase by the door. "Passing through?" I tried to smile, trying to figure out where to land. She smiled softly, We've all been there. I'm Nora Bennett. Grace, I said quietly. Something about her presence, steady, unhurried, made me feel like I could breathe again. She didn't ask for details, didn't pity me, just poured me another coffee and said, "You look like someone who needs a quiet place for a while. I've got a small room upstairs. It's not fancy, but it's warm. You can stay for a week if you help me stock shelves." I blinked, unsure if I'd heard right. "You don't even know me." She shrugged. "I know lost eyes when I see them. I had the same ones once." And just like that, something inside me cracked. Not from pain this time, but relief. That night, I stayed in the small attic room above the shop. The bed was lumpy, but the sheets smelled like lavender. For the first time in weeks, I slept without waking up from the sound of my own heartbeat. Over the next days, I helped Nora unpack boxes of used books, arrange displays, and refilled the coffee jars. Customers came and went, leaving trails of conversation that slowly filled the quiet corners of my mind. Nora never pried, but sometimes she'd tell small pieces of her own story, how she'd rebuilt her life after losing her husband and business in the same year. "Pain changes you," she said once, while labeling books. "But if you let it, it can also teach you to start over differently, softer but stronger." At night, I began to draw again. Sketches of the bookstore, the view from the window, Nora's hands sorting through old novels. My art came back to life, not as escape this time, but as proof that I was still here. When Nora saw my drawings, she smiled. "You've got something special, Grace. Maybe that's where you'll find your way back." For the first time since everything fell apart, I believed her.
3 years passed before I realized I'd built a new life. The bookstore became my world. The smell of coffee beans and paper, the sound of pages turning, the quiet hum of belonging. I painted in the evenings, my sketches filling the walls of the small studio space Nora had insisted I use. "Every artist needs a corner of light," she'd said. Over time, that light grew. People began asking about my art, first the regulars, then a local gallery owner who stopped by for coffee and left with 3 framed pieces. A month later, my first exhibit opened at a tiny art center in downtown Loveland. The night of the opening, the room glowed with soft light, my paintings lining the walls, each one a story of loss, love, and rebirth. I stood near the back, heart pounding, listening to strangers talk about colors and emotion like it was something sacred. For years I had been told that art was sweet, a hobby, a small thing. But here it was, the thing that saved me. Nora squeezed my hand. "See, you were never lost, Grace. You were just waiting to be found by yourself." That sentence stayed with me. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the window, I opened my inbox to find a message from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read, "From your mother." My heart skipped. I hadn't heard from my parents in 5 years. I opened the email slowly. "Grace, we saw your name in the paper. Your exhibit looks beautiful. Your father and I, we are proud of you. We'd like to talk. Maybe have dinner when you're ready. Mom." I sat staring at the screen, the words blurring. Proud. Now they were proud. Not when I was packing my suitcase in the snow, not when I begged to come home. Only now, when the world finally saw my worth. I didn't reply. Later that week, my brother Daniel came into the shop. He looked older, suit wrinkled, eyes tired. "Mom asked me to talk to you," he said. I set down the coffee pot. "I got her email." "They regretted, Grace. They really do." I met his eyes, calm. "Regret doesn't erase the years they let me freeze alone." He nodded slowly. "You've changed." "I had to," I said. He looked around the bookstore, the shelves, the light, my paintings on the wall. "You did good, sis." For the first time in years, those words didn't ache. They landed softly and stayed. After he left, I walked outside. The air smelled like rain, but gentle this time, not like the night everything fell apart. Across the street, a man was unloading lumber from a truck. For a second, I thought of Ethan. I'd heard through a friend he'd left town after his business failed, that he was struggling. I didn't feel anger, just distance, like watching a storm pass miles away. That night, as I locked up the shop, I stood by the window and looked at my reflection. Steady, older, softer around the edges. I whispered, "You made it." The satisfaction wasn't loud. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was the quiet peace that comes when you finally stop needing permission to be yourself. For the first time in my life, I felt whole. Not because someone loved me, but because I did.
Sometimes I walk past the mirror in the bookstore and hardly recognize the woman looking back. Not because of age or time, but because she finally looks like she belongs to herself. It's strange how life circles back. When I think of that girl standing in the snow outside her parents' house, suitcase shaking in her hand, I want to reach through time and tell her, "You'll survive this. You'll even learn to love again, but it won't come from them. It'll come from you." Nora retired last year, leaving the shop to me. "You've got the heart for it," she said, as she handed me the keys. "Books, coffee, people. You understand what keeps them warm." Now, when customers walk in out of the cold, I greet them the way Nora greeted me that first day. No questions, just welcome. Sometimes I see someone sitting in the corner, lost and hollow-eyed, and I'll bring them a cup of coffee and say softly, "You can stay as long as you need." Because that's what saved me, kindness without condition. A few months ago, I started teaching free art classes upstairs on Sundays. The room smells like acrylic and old wood, and sunlight spills across the floorboards. My students are mostly women, some young, some older, all carrying invisible bruises. They paint oceans and mountains and faces that look suspiciously like their own. We talk, we laugh, and sometimes we cry. And every time I see one of them smile again, I realize this is what healing looks like. Not grand, not dramatic, just small, steady acts of creating. One Sunday after class, a woman lingered as everyone else left. She stared at a half-finished canvas, a cracked vase with wildflowers growing from it. She said, "It's not perfect." I smiled. "Neither am I." She laughed, wiping her tears. That laugh echoed in my heart long after she left. Later that evening, I sat in the quiet of the empty shop, lights dim, the snow falling soft outside. My phone buzzed. Another email from my mother. This one was shorter. "We think about you every day. If you ever want to come home, the door is open." For a long moment, I just stared at it. And then I closed my eyes. I imagined walking through that door again, the smell of pine cleaner and roast chicken, my mother's neat handwriting on the grocery list, my father sitting silently at the table. I imagined the apology that might never sound the way I needed it to. And then I imagined staying right where I was, surrounded by books, laughter, and the scent of coffee, and I realized something simple. I was home. So I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Forgiveness had already happened, quietly, over years of learning how to live without their approval. It wasn't about letting them back in, it was about setting myself free from the weight of waiting. Sometimes people walk away because they can't see your worth, but sometimes walking away is how you finally see it yourself. I've stopped chasing love that hurts to hold. I've stopped begging to be chosen by people who never learned how to stay. And maybe that's what life was trying to teach me all along, that peace doesn't always come from fixing the past, it comes from building something beautiful in spite of it. If you're listening right now and you've ever had to walk away from people you loved just to save yourself, I see you. You're not weak, you're not broken,
you're just finally learning to breathe again. Tell me your story in the comments below, because every time we share the truth of our pain, someone else out there finds the courage to start over too. And if this story found you when you needed it, stay, subscribe. Let's keep growing together. Because maybe, just maybe, we're all still learning what love truly means, one story at a time.